Hi folks, it's Mikel Weisser, staff writer for Cannabiz News, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's episode of the Keith Stroup Show. It's a weekly update of the politics of marijuana. Ladies and gentlemen, the star of our show does not need an introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway. He's the man that launched the entire marijuana movement, the founder of NORML, which is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. You know I'm talking about Keith Stroup. Hey Keith, how's it going?
I'm doing fine, Michael. Nice to be with you.
It's been a busy week on the marijuana scene, eh? Canada unveiled their legalization package. Trump appointed an even more reefer madman, Pennsylvania Representative Tom Marino, as his drug czar. North Dakota, West Virginia, Maryland, they make medical a reality. Colorado pulls back on cannabis clubs and co-op grows, and Jerry Brown weighs into the mess that's the California legalization measure. So, Keith, what is the biggest news of the week from Washington, D.C.?
Well, I don't think there's been any significant news out of Washington, D.C., but everything that is coming out of here tends to be depressing. You have the president appointing, or at least is supposed to be appointing, this new congressman to be the drug czar, Tom Marino. And my goodness, if you were looking for one person in the whole country who was probably worse informed on marijuana than Jeff Sessions, it would be Tom Marino. So in some ways, it was really disgusting. I mean, Marino has argued in the recent past that casual marijuana smokers should be treated with a combination of prison and drug rehabilitation. It would all be done inside a prison-like situation, but they would reprogram our minds so that we didn't need to smoke this dangerous reefer that we all seem to enjoy. I mean, he's truly a dangerous man. Now, I also want to make the point real quickly that the Office of Drug Czar, it's actually called the Office of National ONDC Drug Control Policy. It's a meaningless job. It's a bully pulpit. It's a cheerleader for the anti-drug zealots in Congress and in the administration, and they have no real power. So it's disappointing to see a man of such high-level ignorance appointed to any federal position. But if you're going to appoint someone where he can't really do a whole hell of a lot of harm, ONDCP is a good place.
The only way it could be worse is if Jeff Sessions mated with the ghost of Harry Anslinger.
Yes. I think you really are seeing probably among only a handful of people in the entire Washington community that the president's choosing from. Sessions and Congressman Marino are probably the only two people that still think marijuana is almost as dangerous as heroin, as Sessions said recently. And again, Sessions was just shocked the other day to find out that when he said stupid things about marijuana policy, that he got a lot of blowback. Apparently, no one on Jeff Sessions' staff has bothered to show him the national polling, showing 60% and higher of the entire country support legalization, because Jeff Sessions still doesn't believe it, obviously. Now, I don't think he would change if it were 100%, frankly.
Right.
Jeff Sessions is an ideologue. He's never going to do anything that's going to help us. He's always going to try to muck up legalization. He's always going to misrepresent the experience with legalization in the states that have it. But the question is, will he interfere in the actual implementation of those laws? And, of course, none of us know that yet.
Well, since the news is so yucky coming out of Washington, D.C. this week, let's talk about Canada instead, eh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I generally was pleased with what I saw about the Canadian proposal. I mean, it's a big step Trudeau's taking. It's a step his father talked about taking 30 or 40 years ago. So it's interesting to see it come circle total around. Pierre Trudeau had, in fact, talked about legalizing marijuana when he was prime minister. But, of course, nothing came of it back then. So it's nice to see that he's willing to make it a big issue. I mean, that's not a small proposal to throw out there, and there are all kinds of conservative voices in Canada who are going to, of course, use it to beat him over the head with it. But again, I think the citizens in Canada, like the citizens in the U.S., are delighted to see that. And I think he indicated it would take about a year for this to be implemented. If I think in the notes that I read about it, that's a little longer than it seems like it should take, because after all, it's been a couple of years since he first indicated he was intending to do this. But I'd be delighted if a year from now Canada has a system of legalization that we can begin to compare with those that we have running in this country.
There are critics who are complaining about the structure of the proposal, in particular Jody Emery from the cannabis culture. But some of the highlights is a consumer can purchase 1 ounce at a time. They're allowed to grow 4 plants, but though there's a height limit on how tall the plants can be. And a big factor in creating this legalization program is ratcheting up the criminal penalties for violations. This is causing a lot of people to have some complaint. Have you heard about this part, Keith?
Yes, in fact, there is one particular provision where I think providing marijuana to a minor under some circumstances would carry a possible penalty of up to, I can't remember now, 14 years, I think it was.
14 years.
And there was quite a vocal pushback on that. Now, I will say this. I'm not sure the intention was that any individual in the usual circumstances who gave a little marijuana away to a minor or sold some to a minor would get 14 years. I think that was intended for the worst possible case. And there's no mandatory jail sentence required. So it's anywhere from, a suspended sentence all the way up to 14 years. But I am sympathetic to the argument that unless there's a particular problem that you can point to, there's really no justification to be increasing penalties at all. After all, what ending prohibition is about is getting away from those penalties. And the one thing the Canadians do have the benefit of, they have the experience, or they can see the experience that we've had in Colorado and Washington, and now in Alaska and Oregon, although not as much in the latter two. But there has been absolutely no increase in adolescent marijuana smoking in the legalization states. In fact, I think there's been a slight decrease. I'm not suggesting that legalization necessarily caused a measurable decrease, but without question, with legalization, if you're a minor, then to get marijuana, you have to either have a fake ID or you have to have an older friend who will buy it for you. And those two factors mean it's easier for an underage individual to get marijuana under prohibition than under legalization. So I think that whoever came out with this regulation proposing the 14-year sentence was probably anticipating that there might be a pushback politically in Canada by those who are concerned that adolescents there's going to be a big spike in adolescent marijuana smoking. And that was a concern in the U.S. states that have legalized as well. But what actual evidence has shown us over the course of 4 years now is there has been no increase. So I would hope that will be fine-tuned before it takes effect a year from now.
Shout out to this week's sponsor, ultratrust.net, for their support. Rocco Beatrice Sr., the founder of UltraTrust, is one of the nation's foremost experts on asset protection. His articles can be seen in USA Today, ABC News, CBS News, Fox News, and many more. Rocco can help you protect your assets from seizure, creditors, legal actions of all kinds, and hide them from prying eyes. Visit Rocco online at ultratrust.net, where you can download his free report, Managing the Risk of Loss, and learn numerous ways to protect your assets. That's ultratrust.net, ultratrust.net. For people who are following at home, the overall size of the industry is expected to get up to $7 billion in revenue, putting more than $1 billion into Canadian federal taxes, and that's not even talking about the push it's going to give to local taxes and province taxes as well. Here this last week, New Frontier data out of Colorado gave a report that this upcoming year in the United States, marijuana is expected to contribute $655 million in state taxes to the various programs around the country.
And that's before California kicks in.
So in California this last week, Governor Jerry Brown weighed in with something like a 79-page list of recommendations on how to, he used the word harmonize, the existing marijuana laws and the new adult use program. Do you know Jerry Brown personally? Have you looked at this program?
And I don't know Jerry Brown personally. I've certainly been a fan of his from a distance for a long time, going back to the 70s, of course, when he was first governor of California and was dating Linda Ronstadt and sleeping on a mattress on the floor at the time, as I recall. He's been at it a long time, and of course he's been on both sides of the issue. He was actually not a fan of legalizing marijuana when it finally happened in California, although he did eventually come on board. I think the debate, if I understand it right, is over the attempts to avoid having two parallel distribution systems. You know, they've gone through some of that in both Washington State and in Colorado, where they first had legally regulated medical marijuana, including marijuana growers and distributors, or retail outlets, or dispensaries, I suppose they like to be called. And then you come along with full legalization, and initially you have then this second set of licensing where people get licensed to grow it and sell it. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense because they're selling the same marijuana. In other words, it's not like, it's good on the medical side and not so good on the recreational. No, I mean, when you go to Colorado, for example, you often go in a dispensary where they have two sides. And if you have a medical recommendation, you're led into the medical side, where I think the difference is they don't pay a sales tax, I believe is right.
That's what I understand.
But otherwise, you go in the right door for just adult use, and it's the very same marijuana, and you pay 5 or 8% more because you're paying a sales tax. So I think most of us could agree that that's not a real rational way to do it. We probably should find a way to combine the two markets. And again, one way might be to simply maintain the sales tax deduction, or don't apply the sales tax to patients where you would to recreational users. But I think that's where some of the pushback is coming in California. There are some people who feel the medical system is working well now, and they are concerned that somehow if it's meshed in with the recreational system, they're going to lose out. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I think the medical the right to medical marijuana is so well ingrained by now in California that I don't imagine you're going to lose any ground, regardless of whether they merge the two markets.
One of the communities that seems to be complaining about California's model, especially Jerry Brown's proposal, is the Teamsters. Now, how do they get involved in this?
Well, keep in mind that among the medical dispensaries in California, there were a handful who actually unionized. The employees joined a union, and I think the union was the Teamsters Union. In addition, when Prop 64 was that what I get confused with the various initiatives, the one that just passed in California. When it was when they were in the middle of that campaign, they actually had the endorsement of a couple of labor unions, and I think one of them was the Teamsters, because they saw it as an opportunity that was going to create tens of thousands of new jobs, and they want to organize those workers as well they might. So I think that's where the Teamsters got involved. As to where they come down, I think the union's interest in the marijuana field is no different than it is in any other field. What they're interested in moving into any, if there are new jobs being created, they want a chance to propose to those new employees that they be allowed to join a union where they would, one would expect, would have more collective power to demand higher wages and perhaps some health insurance and vacation time and sick pay. I think it's a healthy thing to have the traditional unions get involved in the marijuana legalization movement. I think it's just another indication of how legitimate this whole proposal has now become around the country.
Now, while we're talking about states adding marijuana freedoms or programs, I want to tip my hat. There it is, tipped to the states of North Dakota, West Virginia, and Maryland, which have all made significant progress. I want to get to Maryland a little bit later because they also had some not so great news this last week. But do you have any insights about the programs in whether West Virginia or North Dakota?
Well, what I would say is that in North Dakota, I really do think they should feel quite proud. The legislature tried to gut that law that was passed by a voter initiative, but by the time the end of the session came and the laws were signed, in fact, what they were left with is a real medical use law that allows patients to grow their own. No, it allows them to whole smoke marijuana. I think they lost the right to grow their own during that compromise, and that is too bad. At NORML, we've always felt that consumers have a right to grow your own, whether you're a recreational user or a patient. But the point I want to make is, in the last dozen or so states that have legalized marijuana legislatively, none of them allow patients to smoke marijuana. They have to use edibles, they have to use, oils and salves and everything else, but they can't smoke marijuana because there's some sort of image these legislators have that smoking marijuana is a bad thing, when in truth it's a better delivery system than most.
Yes.
So I'm delighted that in North Dakota, of all places, they fought that off. They were trying to get rid of it, but in the end, they hung on to the right to smoke marijuana. Now, by the same token, in West Virginia, they never had a chance at smoked marijuana. I think that was never on the table. I think it's a traditional same kind of law that's passed in several other conservative states. And in Maryland, they can't smoke marijuana either. In Maryland, they can use it in these other forms. Now, there are two real problems in Maryland. One was it has taken them like 2 years to get this far, and they only this week have announced that patients can now apply for licenses, and I believe they've started accepting applications from dispensaries as well. But it's by no means up and running yet, and it's about, as I say, I think it's been about 2 years since they passed that. Now, the second point, I don't know if they approved 5 dispensaries or 8 dispensaries or whatever it was. It was very limited, and every one went to a white person who was well connected to the current state legislative leadership. Not a single one went to a minority. And in fact, it was so obvious that the Black Caucus in the Maryland legislature finally got up in arms about it and demanded that they either reopen the process of granting those licenses to give minority groups a chance or add some additional licenses. They were well on the way to the latter. There was a bill right before the legislature closed that would have established a number of additional licensed growers and sellers, and the intent clearly was to give minorities a leg up for those. But unfortunately, they ran out of time and they didn't reach agreement. So I'm sure that'll be a high item on their agenda in Maryland the next time around. But for the moment, it's still you better be a white guy who's got a good relationship with the legislative leadership, or you're not in the marijuana business in Maryland.
Yeah, reports from that last day of the legislative session say that the bill finally came up for discussion at 11:55, and the speaker ran out the clock. It's worth noting that the sponsor of that bill, Representative Cheryl Glenn, is the daughter of the woman that their medical program is named after, Natalie LePrade, who died of cancer while they've been fooling around with the legislative process.
Yeah, I hope someone was able to get her some relief at least, even though it would have been from the black market at the time. You can imagine all of us, I think, who are active in the legalization movement, we are occasionally approached by someone in a situation like that, and it's almost impossible to just say no or ignore it. You've got to find a way to help them. But, there's a good bit of risk involved in that.
There's another state that made news this last week with a legalization statehouse bill, and those generally don't have much of a chance, but Illinois is considering a bill this week at their legislature. Do you know anything about that one?
Well, I've seen that they were giving it far more serious consideration, I think, than most people expected. On the other hand, at the end of the day, it either has died or is about to die. I don't think there's any state that is going to legalize marijuana this year legislatively. And to some degree, I think you can attribute that, well, but partially it's attributable to the fact that state elected officials are necessarily more conservative on issues like this than are the general public. So even though you can show 60% of the country support legalization, you can even show higher percentages than that in some of these states. Each of these state elected officials thinks that in his home district, that's not the case, that they're still anti-marijuana. So I think that we are still a couple of years off from winning legalization in a Midwestern state like Illinois by legislature. But I do say that they will likely be the first state to do it legislatively, and it's a significant state. Now, there was a chance this year, as you know, in the New England. We had a chance in Vermont and New Hampshire and Rhode Island and Connecticut. They were all talking about legalization. But again, as we get to the end of the day, it does not appear that any of those are going to pass. It's a longer process than 1 year, and people can't allow themselves to get discouraged. We've been at this since 1970 at NORML. So if it takes another year or two before we break through in those New England states, that's fine. We've got good groups working in each of them, and we've got good support among the public. So my guess is by next year we will win at least 2 of those states. But again, I think it's a lot to expect that we might win Illinois. Illinois is a fairly conservative Midwestern state. It's like winning Ohio. So I think we may be a couple of years off there yet.
Well, that is a great set of reminders. And for those of you who are inspired by this message, want to take your part in helping change it, we'd like to ask you to check out the NORML website, where you can find out about what the national group is doing and what the local chapters are in your area. Now, that's NORML.org. It's about all the time we have this week, so I'd like to thank our host, Keith Stroup, for joining us from National NORML headquarters, and encourage you to tune in each week for the latest in marijuana news from Washington, D.C. and around the country. Once again, this has been the Keith Stroup Show. I'm Mikel Weisser, and you're listening to Cannabiz News. Keith Stroup Show was brought to you by ultratrust.net. Protect your assets from seizure, creditors, and legal action with UltraTrust's Irrevocable Trust Fund. Visit ultratrust.net to learn more, and while you're there, download their free report, Managing the Risk of Loss, and learn about ways to legally protect your assets. That's ultratrust.net. ULTRATRUST.net.